What's up and welcome to the Level Health Podcast. Today, Josh is interviewing Dr. Dan Ritchie. Dan is the co-founder and president of Functional Aging Institute. FAI is focused on providing fitness professionals with techniques and strategies for training older adults. He's completed his master's in health and physical education and his PhD in kinesiology with a minor in gerontology. He's also a personal trainer and gym owner. Big thanks to Dr. Dan for coming on our show. You can follow Functional Aging Institute on Instagram at FAI Education or check out their website, functionalaginginstitute.com.
So I actually can't take credit for you coming on the podcast because it was your idea, actually. But I was very excited because a lot of my experience training has been with the senior population. And I truly feel like they are really, I think we talked about this a little bit, getting shortchanged by the industry overall because they're just not being focused on, they're not being catered to very well at all. And it was really heartening to see an entire organization really trying to tackle that problem like you guys are.
Yeah, I mean, we've been saying now, we opened our studio in 2007, and that's 15 years ago. If you think about the oldest baby boomers are turning 75 and 76 here in 2022, right? 15 years ago, they were just entering their 60s, and we were saying there is a huge population coming that's going to be in their 60s and 70s. And here we are, fast forward to 2022, and you got 72 million baby boomers still with us, and they're going to be 58 to 76 here in 2022, right? I mean, in 2 years, they're going to all be 60 and up, and they're really not going anywhere, right? I mean, I think that's the mistake. People are like, oh, I don't want to train old people. It's like, well, do you think a 62-year-old's really that old? Like, they're probably going to be a client for 10, 15, maybe 20 years. I mean, I've looked at our client roster, and it's like, oh my gosh, we've had Terry Smith has been paying us $3,000 to $4,000 a year for like 9 years, So, and I think she started out in her mid 50s and here she is in her 60s. And I was teasing her the other day. I'm like, hey, Terry, you're turning 65. Like, are you excited about being called a senior? She was like, I'm not going to be a senior, right? She was almost insulted. So I think for too long, we haven't really understood, because we haven't aged ourselves, right? We haven't really understood what's it like to be 60. Well, you're not old at 60, right? You might start to feel old at 80, but even at 80, you could be a client for several years. So I think we've just missed a huge segment of the population that honestly needs personal training more than any other segment. So it's a great opportunity for trainers.
I would completely agree. I mean, I'm sure we're obviously going to get into all the benefits that this population can stand to gain from qualified, or actually just an effective personal trainer. But I mean, as we get better at keeping people alive for longer, like you said, this pool of people is just going to continue to grow and grow. And perhaps it's even going to the left a little bit, right? Because people are entering this, I don't want to say debilitative stage, but this stage of problems much earlier on than they had in the past. So I think that Functional Aging Institute and kind of the ideas and the concepts that y'all are working on are going to be incredibly important going forward. So if you don't mind, just on that note, kind of, Dr. Dan, can you give us some background on who you are and why you do what you do? And then obviously we can just roll into what do you hope to achieve with Functional Aging Institute?
Yeah, so I'm a personal trainer by trade. I got my undergrad at Southeast Missouri State and quickly realized after a year of strength coaching that I didn't want to work with Division I athletes the rest of my life, and moved on to Wisconsin to finish my master's degree and worked at a large health club, kind of your typical big box gym. And I realized, man, training people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s is rewarding. I can help people. Of course, this is like 99, 2000, right? So I mean, you go back 20 some years, the people in their 40s and 50s were baby boomers, right? They're a generation ahead of me. And I'm realizing what are they struggling with? Well, balance and agility. And I just don't quite have the same athletic ability I had as 10, 15 years ago. I want to keep water skiing. So I decided to come to Purdue University here in West Lafayette, Indiana, get a PhD and focus on balance training. And while doing that for 5 years, I realized falling is a huge problem. In fact, it's a huge epidemic in our country that nobody's talking about, right? 400,000 people every year falling and breaking a hip. And I realized we need to have more fitness programming, training options for people in their 60s and 70s. And That led to us opening a personal training studio called Miracles Fitness, which we opened in 2007, with the ultimate goal of sort of teaching the model for training, business, everything. And that led to the Functional Aging Institute in 2014.
You said 400,000 people fall every year, and obviously not all of them end up with kind of the worst possible outcome from that, but it is a strong concern in terms of outcomes post that, correct? It's not just, oh, I had this acute fall and there's a problem here.
Yeah, so it's more like 10 million people fall every year. It's 400,000 actually break a hip, fracture a hip. So it's the hip fracture statistics that we start to notice, because 100,000 hip fractures are dead and gone within a year. And so when we realize that hip fracture is never listed as anyone's cause of death, because that's not really the mechanism for what kills you. But if you die 2 weeks later from pneumonia, or you never got out of the hospital, right, it doesn't get listed as your cause of death. If you're cooking Thanksgiving and then 6 months later you're gone, it's like, wait, well, grandma fell and broke her hip and never recovered from it. And it's like, well, why is that? And hip fracture is just one of many, right? Vertebral fractures, about 300,000 to 400,000 a year. Wrist fractures, about 300,000 to 400,000 a year. I mean, 2 million people every year are showing up at the emergency room with serious fall-related injuries. So that 10 million is a huge number. You start thinking about that's going to go up. They're estimating that's going to go up 50% in the next 10 years. Well, why is that? Because in 4 or 5 years, guess who starts turning 80? Well, baby boomers, and they're going to do it in twice the number of the previous generation. So falling is going to become a bigger and bigger problem. And it's really a public health issue, because guess what? We're all paying for it, right? I mean, most of these fall related injuries wind up on Medicare, and they're a huge burden on the healthcare system. So it's a staggering statistic, really, when you look at how many people are falling and how many people are having serious injuries.
Is it just not being addressed because it's kind of a function of our general medical system that's focusing on like these kind of short term, like fixing what's happening now instead of digging just a couple layers deep? Because you digging just why did she fall? Okay, well, she's just got leg strength because of inactivity over the past decade. So is it just a function of that? Is there something larger going on that's causing this problem?
Yeah, it's very complex, I would say. We like to, in academia, say it's a multifactorial problem, right? There's a lot of different causes. Some of it is due purely to our ageist society, right? We just sort of have this mentality of, oh, well, they were 85, so what do we expect? They fell, Well, we shouldn't just expect that 85-year-olds are falling and breaking, right? I mean, if you fell down, Josh, I wouldn't expect you to break your hip if you fell, right? I mean, if I fell playing basketball, I'm not going to break my hip, So what's really going on? How is it that people are getting to an age where they're falling now repeatedly and they're falling and having serious injuries? And so there's a number of things. Some of it is medication, right? People are on too many medications. And as a physician, it's like, well, I got to treat your blood pressure and your cholesterol and these other things. And the side effect might be you're dizzy and your balance is off and you're disoriented. I mean, if I threw you on 9 medications, right? Like, what? All of a sudden you'd be like, man, I don't feel quite myself, right? So there's a complexity to it. There's not a simple solution. But then kind of underlying the whole thing is this concept of ageism that we just sort of accept that, like, well, to be 80 means you're going to be weaker and more frail and not have good balance, when if our belief was to be 80 means you're downhill skiing and wakeboarding, right? We'd be like, wait a minute, something's wrong. You're falling and losing your balance. Right? I mean, if you were falling down, we would be like, hey, there's something wrong. We got to get this fixed. We got to figure it out. Maybe you're on some medication you need to be on for whatever it is. Well, let's figure out if that's causing it. And we don't always do that with people in their 70s and 80s. We just sort of, again, it's this ageist mentality of, well, what do we expect? And you even hear the person say, well, I'm 75. What do you expect from me, Josh? Well, I expect you to not be falling down and getting hurt. I expect you to be able to go for a hike and a bike ride and do all sorts of things and not be at risk of injury. So there's sort of a society global issue there. No one entity's to blame. Healthcare can't be held responsible for you sitting on the couch for 40 years, not maintaining your strength and your balance and your agility. Healthcare can't be held responsible for the fact that you haven't taken care of your health very well. And now you need these 3 medications to help keep you healthy and alive. And we know once you get to 3 medications or more, your risk of falling goes way up.
So you're telling me, Dr. Dan, that we are in fact not just doomed to degrade as we age. Just there's going to be some degree of that, of course. But I mean, the classic thing that I've heard my entire life and continue to hear as a personal trainer was like, oh, when you're 50, you'll understand, like, you're not the same when you're 50. It's like, okay, yes, I understand that time takes a toll on all of this, but like you said, just accepting that and as fact is certainly going to contribute to that being an issue further down the road. But how do we functionally age? How do we allow ourselves to age more slowly in this regard?
Yeah, it's really the concept of, to be older, does that mean we're going to lose function and be weak and be sick and, is frailty up for sure? And the reality is it's not. And we see people that age really, really well. And then we have to look at, well, what have they done that has set them apart, right? Why do we look at someone who's wakeboarding in their 90s, right, and say, well, that's crazy? Well, it's only crazy because it's not normal to us, right? And so we would like to believe that people hiking and swimming and biking and being active and doing things in their 80s and 90s is normal. But for that to happen, it means you have to be training. You got to be maintaining some strength, some agility, some balance, some cardiovascular health, some cognitive health. You have to be working really hard to maintain those things. There's a trajectory of aging for all of us, and genetics plays about 20 to 25% of that, which means 75 to 80% of it is really up to us. I think sometimes people think, well, I don't have good genes for it. It's like, well, 80% of it's really up to you. You're really designing what you're going to look like at 70 and 80. And so, yeah, is 50 going to feel different than 25? Absolutely. Right. I think we're foolish to say, oh, I'm going to feel the same in my 70s as it. No, you're not. But can you be very fit and very functional? Can you be playing sports, tennis, softball, all sorts of things in your 70s? Absolutely. Dr. Eugster was one of my heroes of aging. His last name is spelled sort of weird, Eugster. I mean, he took up rowing and sprinting and weightlifting and bodybuilding in his 80s and 90s. And then he decided to try wakeboarding. I've mentioned wakeboarding a couple of times. He tried it in his 90s, right? And did quite well with it, had a blast. And we only think that's crazy because it's not normal to us, right? It's not something we expect to see 90-year-olds doing. Well, so what did he have? He had enough strength to do it. He had enough upper body strength, enough lower body strength. He had enough balance. He had enough power, right? He would tell you, I'm not as strong as when I was 40 or 50, but I'm strong enough. I'm fit enough. I have enough balance that I can do this wakeboarding thing, so.
Yeah, that's super cool because I mean, I used to be incredibly strength and aesthetic focused to the point where it was absolutely not conducive to long-term physical fitness, strength, right, everything, honestly, because it was just hyper focused. And like what you mentioned just there right now was something that I'm always trying to consider is if a human being, obviously wakeboard, it's a whole other thing. Those kind of coordination things are different. But if a human being is supposed to be able to do it, I feel pretty comfortable that I'd be able to do it. Like there are very few things that I've tried to pick up at a store or around the house. Or I mean, the other day I was putting together a big tool bench and it had this big old sheet of metal on the back and I'm holding it up with one hand and screwing it in with the other. I'm like, there's no way that I would have been able to do this safely had I not trained in such a way. And that was, I was curious because you said learning that wakeboarding at that age, and they had a good level of general physical preparedness, it seemed like. But I was wondering, just actually up until you said that, was it very specificity? So they you say the difference between an 80-year-old that's skiing and hiking and stuff at that age, have they always just done that and that's why? Or is there some underlying principles that you can kind of revert back to prepare yourself for all of that? Yeah.
Both are true, actually, Josh. So we really encourage people later in life to take up new activities and new sports, even if it winds up being something you're not good at, right? Like tennis, for example, is a great sport to take up at any age. It's a sport you can play in your 90s. Now, you're going to play it at a different speed and level than in your teens, of course, but it's a sport just about anyone can take up at any age. Doesn't mean you're going to be good at it. It's a hand-eye coordination sport, and there's certain things to it. Some people take to it naturally, and some people don't. Rowing, for example, Dr. Eugster became a World Masters rowing champion. That takes less coordination, but there's still a timing element to it, right? There's still an aspect to rowing that is a skill that some people can acquire easily and some people can't. Sprinting was something he was able to take up in his 80s and 90s. And he joked, he's like, hey, I set the world record for a 90-year-old in the 100 and 200 because there wasn't much competition, So those are things we can encourage people, hiking, biking, playing basketball, pickleball, there's golf. I mean, there's so many sports and activities. Just because you've never tried them doesn't mean you can't learn them. Now, some people listening will be like, well, yeah, but I'm not a sports person. Okay, well then let's do something else. Maybe it's dancing, or maybe it's traveling. Maybe it's going on some sort of an adventure, or taking a trip, or doing something with your grandkids, or, taking on a new activity also grows us in a lot of ways. I think too many people do the same thing over and over. Like you said, you got so hyper focused on doing the same thing that almost can become unhealthy, right? I mean, it's like we have to have sort of a diversity to the things we do. And that really helps us, I think, physically, mentally, cognitively, socially. So we encourage people to try new things. Now, if you are a downhill skier in your 20s and 30s and very good at that, that actually is a skill you can continue and pick back up in your 70s and 80s because you already have the muscle memory there, right? Like your body knows how to do it. You know what to do. Your brain knows that pathway. It's amazing. We see people with Alzheimer's. Tony Bennett's a great example, right? Like he doesn't really even remember performing, but he gets on the stage and can sing 10 numbers, right? It's like, it's still there. It's part of his brain pathway. And so I tell people, yeah, whatever sport, hobby, activity you were good at younger, let's start training so you can do it again. Maybe it's horseback riding. For some people, they're like, I just want to keep horseback riding, or I want to keep bird watching, or I want to, whatever it is you love doing, let's train for that so you can do it as long in life as possible, right? If you really enjoy certain activities, let's not set them down. Let's keep doing them, right? And so let's train for all those things you love doing in life, because to me, that's really then living life, right? Like you're not really living well in your 80s if you're like, well, I went to the grocery store and I was able to get to the bank and I got myself dressed today. It's like, I don't know if that's a high quality of life we're looking for.
Yeah, at that point, you're really just surviving. And
yeah,
I think that's really, I think when that cognitive decline really kicks in, because we touched on a lot of, you said dancing, all of these activities that are going to be incredibly neurologically beneficial for people of this age, any age really, but of this age especially, because you're literally forging new neural pathways that were not there before. And gosh, if that's not, it's the same way, I look at it the same way as having this reserve of muscle, of lean body mass, because it's going to go away. Same thing with the neurological side of things. And we touched on a lot of activities and stuff that are awesome. I think that's really, we'd be ridiculous to think that most people of this age should get their activity in a gym. But because we're personal trainers, I wanted to go into a little bit of like, what are some methods that you use as in the gym as a personal trainer to kind of help this population? Is it learning new skills in terms of like exercise, improving form on exercises, things like that? What are some of your go-tos?
Well, primary go-to is going to be lower body strength. If we're going to function well as humans, we've got to have lower body strength. I got to have enough strength to get out of a chair, to get up from a toilet, to move across a room, to carry myself up and down stairs. Ideally, I tell people you got to be able to go up and down stairs carrying something over your head. Right? People are always like, well, why would I do that? I'm like, well, then I know you don't need a railing, right? Not only do I know you don't need a railing, you don't even need your arms because they're over your head, right? And if you can carry a load up and down stairs, I know your balance is fairly decent. So stairs is a great task. And guess what happens? People get to a certain age, they move out of homes with stairs, right? And now they have no stairs in their life. And then all of a sudden they go to a family member who wants to put them in the guest room upstairs. And they're like, oh my gosh, I can't carry my luggage up. Can somebody help me? And, it's like, no, that's ridiculous. You should be able to go up and down stairs carrying something, right? So when we break that down, then we're like, well, what do we have to do? Well, we got to be able to do some squats. We got to be able to do some lunges. We got to be able to do some step-ups holding something, some step-ups reaching out with a weight, some step-ups holding a weight overhead. So those sort of functional movements. And then how can we change all of those 50 different ways, right? Like we're not going to just do your traditional squat. We're going to do a squat with a staggered stance. We're going to do a squat where you got to step over and straddle something. We're going to do a squat while you're moving, for the most part, a lot of your basic weight room type activities aren't that functional, right? Like a barbell squat. When are you ever going to really do that in life? I mean, almost never, right?
Yeah.
So let's take real things like I got to pick up a 40-pound bag of salt, right? Well, I might have to move while I do that, right? I got to pick it up. I got to move with it. I got to put it down. So we're going to be doing a lot of that sort of stuff, picking stuff up, moving it, lifting it, turning with it, putting it on a shelf, all those sorts of movements, even getting up and down from the floor in a variety of different ways.
Yeah.
Now people are like, oh, you can't do burpees with old people. I'm like, why not? They got to get up and down from the floor too, right? Now we might have to modify it, might have to change it, but they still have to be able to do that basic get up and down from the floor. They need to be able to do push-ups. Every exercise pretty much can have a modification or a different level, so beyond lower body strength, probably the next thing I'm really looking at is balance and agility. So movement, right? Stepping over stuff, walking on tiptoes, walking wide, walking skinny, changing your gait pattern, and then changing all of that with weight in your hands, right? So let's put one weight in one hand. We do way too much stuff with both weights, and how often do you get to carry an equally loaded load? Like when you carry the groceries in, is it exactly 10 pounds in each hand? No. In fact, you get to the door and you have to put it all in one hand and then open the door. So let's do some off balance. Like let's put 10 pounds in one hand and do some step over patterns and walking on tiptoes and high marching. And we got to get people's gait pattern more flexible and adjustable. The parking block in the parking lot has never tripped anyone, but people trip on them all the time. They're the same height. They're not moving, yet older people trip on them. Right? They're not good at stepping over things because they don't change their gait pattern, right? They're not doing drills like we used to in high school sports, right? So we have to do all that stuff. You don't have to do it in the gym, but if you're going to get your clients into the gym, let's use agility ladders and cones and obstacle courses and, all of that sort of stuff. And you can even use imaginary things. I mean, I'll do things like stepping over the sleeping dog and stepping over a cat, stepping over a fire hydrant, straddling around stuff.
Yeah.
All of that stuff is great stuff.
Yeah, and you can obviously then customize it to them by asking, okay, what are some of, do you have a cat at home? Do you have a dog at home? Do you have grandchildren? What are some of these things that could be an issue for you? And I think that we can even, as personal trainers, really not deceive is the right word, but cause problems because the fitness industry in general. So say, it's a 60, 70, 80-year-old and they've been going to this same workout class every day, every Monday and Wednesday, Friday for however many years, a decade. And they have this very prescriptive, like you said, back squats. A lot of trainers will have these people do back squats. And it's like, you're going to kind of deceive yourself into thinking that you're prepared, because what happens as soon as you split legs, you're on, a split stance, or what happens when you're rotating and you haven't rotated? It's like, you think that you're prepared for these things, and you may even have a little bit of strength, which in the end, in that context, may actually be detrimental for you, because then you load, a bag of cat litter on one shoulder and you've never loaded your spine unilaterally, and now you got a problem. So it's, I mean, being too specific in the gym can certainly be an issue, but I think for this population, it like you're saying, stepping over imaginary things that they're going to encounter. And then, gosh, I don't know, does that, subconsciously kind of wire their brain to be more aware? We got a little Chihuahua, almost 2 years ago now, and I stepped on her a bunch of times in the beginning, but now I have almost like a sixth sense where I'm just stepping. I feel she's there, and I think that that's just repetition. And that's a little bit of a specific to me, but I think that we kind of, the fitness industry jacked functional. I think you can agree with that. I think they stole functional, and I wanted to hear, is it just, to you, is it just being able to accomplish the task of daily living? It is dependent from person to person. Do you find that? Do you kind of dig to find individually what that means to them?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two ways that we look at defining it. One is sort of what are the core functions that humans need, and we break that down into, there's kind of 6 different domains of function, but then it is very human specific, right? Because one client might say, I want to downhill ski. Well, what do you have to do functionally to downhill ski? That's different than the next client who says, I just want to be able to take walks and, go to the park with my grandkids. It's like, well, maybe they don't need as much dynamic hopping and weight shifting and, weight transfer and center of gravity control as a downhill skier. So that level of function could be different from one person to the next. But we all need a basic level of function in terms of, we got to have the ability to get up and down from the floor. We got to be able to get out of a chair. We got to be able to walk across a room. Function to do all the things that we need to do in life. And that's really not negotiable. And so once you get to the point where you can't get out of a chair with any level of power, you're becoming a fall risk, right? And so some people would argue, well, what does an 80-year-old need? I'm like, well, an 80-year-old needs as much function to do all the things they enjoy doing in life. And that list should be pretty long, and some of them are just independent. Like, I just want to be able to, go hang out with my family. I want to be able to go to church. I want to be able to go to the bridge club, whatever activities you enjoy doing, take a certain functional ability. And so we say you really have to be training. The older you get, you have to be thinking about your training for functional ability, and even less so for fitness. I don't know that 80-year-olds have to be super strong. I think sometimes we get too hyper focused on strength. It's like, you don't have to be super strong, but you do have to be strong enough to maneuver your own body, right? You have to have enough balance to not fall, right? And one of the things we do try to wire into people's brains is, what happens when you are losing your balance, right? Like, what's your innate reaction? Well, it should be to step big and fast, not step small and little, which is a lot of people, they take little itty bitty steps. Now, what are you doing? You're running into a fall, right? I mean, try to recover from a fall with tiny little bitty steps. You're never going to recover. You're going to fall worse. Take a giant step and take it quickly. Get your hands out, right? Last thing you want to do is fall on your face, right? You'd much rather fall on your hands. I mean, you'd rather have a broken wrist than a broken forehead or a broken nose, or, you land on your head and can be fatal, right? So, so there are some basic things we start teaching people in terms of, well, how should you react? How should you respond? If you're losing your balance, right? Take a big step, shift your center of gravity, move your arms that direction. And so even playing games like catch and swinging your arms and starts to wire in the brain how to react quickly. And some of those things I think we stop doing, right? I mean, we get to a certain age and we stop playing, we stop throwing balls, we stop moving quickly. Then all of a sudden we're thrown off balance and our body doesn't naturally react, right? Like, if I lose my balance in the yard, or if I'm playing soccer with the kids or whatever, I don't fall on my face on the ground, like I roll into it, I get my arms out, and I get back up quickly. So there is a basic level of function we all need. And the functional training, at its core was really about, let's train three-dimensional human movement. I think at its core, it was saying, hey, we got to get away from just sagittal machines, right? It realized machine training was bodybuilding era, right? Let's isolate the bicep, let's isolate the quadricep, let's do a leg extension or arm curl. Well, that's great for bodybuilding. It's not necessarily great for function. And so the original intent of functional training was, let's train the body in all three planes of motion, right? Sagittal plane, frontal plane, transverse plane. And that was great. The problem was, then we got into contests of, well, how functional can we make it, right? And you got people standing on stability balls and jumping off of things and doing stuff that's like, more gymnastics and trapeze than it is actual training. So we're not into that. Like, we don't encourage people to stand on crazy platforms if they're older adults. Let's be logical. The reality is, most of us just need better balance on the ground, right? We don't have to get on some kind of an implement, so. But train people in all the movements, right? Like, we don't even throw out machines. Like, a leg press is valuable, right? If somebody's having trouble getting out of a chair, am I going to start with a three-dimensional squat movement with a weight? No, let's just start with a leg press, so we can use all of it. And let's think about, what does this person need to do better, right? What do they need to function better? And so for some people, it's, a leg press, a chair stand, a basic movement to get better, and then we progress.
Yeah, I think a big part of really where the industry goes wrong with most populations, honestly, but especially this one, is the individualization and not considering that at all, and just having this prescribed approach. Like you said, the standing on BOSU balls, holding another ball, doing all types of movements. Like, that lady can barely stand normally. She's having trouble walking over to that BOSU ball. Like, I don't think that's what she needs right now. Probably ever, actually, because she's not doing that in real life. But
exactly.
Yeah, that's so incredibly important. But I wanted to move on just a little bit to the kind of business side of things. How can we better reach this population? What are some methods and just forms of communication that have worked with them?
Yeah. Well, I think understanding them is the first start. So then you know how to communicate to them, because I think we make the mistake by using labels and terms and assumptions, and nobody likes any of that, right? I mean, no generation does, right? I mean, if we marketed to millennials for fitness as if they were still living in their parents' basement and they're lazy, right? Some stereotype of their generation, they're not going to respond to that either, right? So we have to be careful with terms like senior and silver and golden years and all these
Mhm.
kind of just gross generalizations, which are ridiculous. We have to start to realize that, people like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone are in their 70s, right? I mean, it's like we've got to think about, well, what does someone in their 60s and 70s identify with? What do they want, right? Well, they want to be healthy. They want to be strong. They want to look good. They care about their appearance. They certainly don't want to be struggling with falling or balance or any of those sorts of things. So how do we communicate to them that our fitness program is designed with them in mind, right? How do we market to them? What images do we use? That's a big mistake, right? We use images of people that look old, right? Or like, just because you're 60 doesn't mean you think you're gray haired, wrinkled, really old, right? If you're 60, you probably think you're 45. And so we have to use appropriate images. We got to use appropriate messages. I think we almost need to get the word fitness in a lot of cases out of our conversation, right? And just talk about health and vitality and energy. Energy is a big one. And I think words like restore and renew, right? Like, we're looking for women that want to restore and renew their energy and have greater vitality and the ability to do all the things they want to do, right? I never use the word fitness, right? And then you might show an image of women in their 50s playing tennis or golf or, something active, or doesn't necessarily have to even be a sport. It could be people walking on the beach, right? So I think that's a big piece. The other then I think is realizing that they're on Facebook, they're on email. We can market to them through Facebook. We can market to them through email. They have lots of organizations and clubs, right? We can visit like a Rotary Club, or a Kiwanis Club is going to tend to have mostly retirees who are very civic minded. There's lots of clubs and organizations they're part of. They might be a slightly different generation than you're used to. Like, they like in-person meetings and they like handshakes and eye contact, and they want you to know their name and some of those sorts of things. But they do still email. Baby boomer women, that 55 to 75-year-old female is on Facebook. And she's looking for something that you could offer her because no one's offering her anything. So there are definite opportunities. And I think communicating in a way that doesn't sound fitness intimidating, but sounds sort of, health, longevity, vitality, energy. I think if we think about what do people want from fitness, because most people don't want fitness. I mean, let's be honest, like, if most people wanted fitness, right, everyone would be a gym member, right? I mean, everyone would be in a multiple they'd like, oh, well, I'm not a member of one gym, I'm a member of 3 gyms, and I've got this fitness coach. That's not our society, right? So we have to think most people don't really want fitness, but they do want what fitness can do for them. They do want to feel better. They do want to move better. They do want to have less joint pain. They do want to have more energy. They would like to probably drop those 20 pounds, So how can we communicate that without sounding fitnessy?
Yeah, the fitnessy it truly is a problem, because whether we realized it or not, we created this kind of mystique around the fitness space. Like, it's this hardcore warrior mentality that's required for any type of progress or any type of fitness, exactly like you said. And that in and of itself may be dissuading. And it's disappointing, because like functional fitness can mean truly what it means, just, being able to function better in your daily life, but and be healthier, of course. But we definitely kind of hijacked that entire thing. And overall, I've been thinking about this quite a bit lately, and it really rings true for this population is, as fitness professionals, we sometimes make it more difficult for people to get in shape or healthier. Like, we create these unnecessary obstacles, whether it's our own biases or just an ignorance to a kind of more principled way of doing things, if that makes sense. But I mean,
Yeah.
we're just so focused on like the social media aspect. So that I thank you for pointing out that they're more Facebook oriented, and meeting people in person is a great way to do it as well. Because I mean, I hope that they're not on Instagram. I hope that this population at large is not on Instagram looking for fitness advice, because it's really not the place to do that. And that was a big kind of impetus for us forming Level, is to try to eventually provide an alternative for these people, for everybody to find help off of social media. So thank you very much for touching on that. What other forms of outreach have you tried? I'm interested in that because it seems to be, I mean, I've done some in the past working with organizations in the area, but I was wondering to hear some of your examples, if you had any.
Yeah. Oh man, we have so many, but I think in-person opportunities are great, right? If you know you want to go after, say, people in their 60s and 70s, for example, then let's go to the events and organizations where they are, right? And let's look for speaking opportunities. So then when you start to look, all of a sudden you realize they're everywhere, right? It's like, whoa, there's a Purdue retirees conference every year. Okay, well, let's make sure I have a booth at that. And the booth is like $40, right? And there's 180 Purdue retirees that attend the conference. And if you show up enough and somebody on the committee realizes, oh, you have a PhD in aging and fitness, like I got to speak at the event twice, so, but I have a booth at it every single time. Caregivers events. Well, why do you show up at a caregivers event? Well, who's looking for caregiving? It's typically people in their 50s and 60s who have parents in their 80s and 90s. And it's the person looking for a caregiver that is a potential client. Caregivers Fair. We did that for, I don't know, 8 or 10 years. It was $25 to have a booth at the Caregivers Fair. So there are events like that. Home care companies. So Home Care by Design in my town, they've put on a conference now 4 or 5 times, New Aging Paradigm. Well, where'd they get that idea? They got the idea from me. I said, hey, why don't we put on a conference? You guys have a huge clubhouse. They have people come in for bingo and bridge and all sorts of speakers and activities. I said, let's put on a conference. I'll speak. I'll get Dr. Klein, a chiropractor, to speak. I'll go get a professor from Purdue. We can probably get a financial advisor to sponsor the lunch, right? We'll put on a whole event. We did it again 6 months later. They had me speak again, and they've done it 3 or 4 more times and had other people speak. And then you've got all your different clubs and organizations, your Rotary clubs, your Noon Optimist clubs, your Breakfast Optimist clubs, your Lions clubs, your Kiwanis clubs, your country clubs, your golf course and tennis clubs. I mean, there's so many. When you start to dive into them, you're like, I didn't realize all these organizations were going on. There are churches that often have a senior club, right, or a senior fellowship group that they will have monthly gatherings. And so you just have to start going to look for all these in-person opportunities. There's tons of them out there. And those are pretty easy, I think, low-hanging fruit. And then the other ones that I think are great, simple opportunities are developing your relationships with similar businesses that serve these clients, right? Like, who else are serving people in their 60s and 70s? Well, what are people in their 60s and 70s dealing with? What do they need, right? Well, some are having joint replacements. So we probably should know a physical therapist or a physical therapy clinic. Probably should know a chiropractor. Probably should know a massage therapist. Some of these ladies get their nails done. Like, what's the nail salon for women in their 60s and 70s? Is there a clothing store like a Chico's? Like, we trained the manager of Chico's for like 3 years, and we gave her a huge discount because she was the manager at Chico's, right? I mean, the women who shop there are 60, 70 years old. They're our clients. So I usually just tell people, go looking for where these people are hanging out. And all of a sudden you're like, this really isn't, it's really not that hard. You just go hang out at their clubs. All of a sudden you get invited to speak at these home extension groups and these quilting clubs. And I got invited to a women's secret philanthropy society.
Did they blindfold you?
Yeah. I still don't know the name of it. They would not tell me. I'm like, does your group have a name? They're like, it does, but we don't tell our guest speakers. I'm like, okay. It's all retired women, pretty much all wealthy women, and they just want to be anonymous because they do all sorts of donations, give certain kids scholarships. If somebody's house burns down, they'll write you a check for $5,000, that kind of stuff, but they don't want to be known, So super cool group to show up and get to speak to, right? A little intimidated, a little bit weird, but so there are these groups out there. You just have to start looking and asking.
Yeah, I mean, who's who has time to be in an organization, if not, this older population. But
Right.
that was awesome, because it seems like in a way that no other market is in the fitness space, that this one is pretty untapped. Like there's not, I mean, in any niche or any approach, you can certainly get real creative and find, I've always thought it's important to connect with physical therapists, especially, different physical minded professionals in your area. But this one is pretty untapped. Is that a fair assessment?
It's very untapped, very untapped. I mean, I always say everyone listening right now, think of your market. You probably in any 2-3 mile direction could think of 5 different fitness places, right? There's a yoga studio, there's a big box gym, there might be a church-based fitness center. I mean, there's health clubs and personal training studios and boxing gyms and MMA gyms and all kinds of stuff. But now think of how many of those are really targeting people over 60, over 70, right? I mean, it's just largely untapped. And then when you think about the fact that 1 out of 3 people in our market are 55 and over, and those people 55 and over control about 80% of spending power in our market, right? It's like, where do you want to be? Like, do you want to be where everybody else is in the 18 to 49, where only 20% of the spending power is? That's where we get the cost objection and the time objection and the I can't afford it and I can't keep doing it because, right?
Or I think I know what I'm doing already. I don't need your help.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the other thing is, a 35-year-old oftentimes has short-term goals. They want to lose 10 pounds or 20 pounds or whatever. And if you're a good trainer and they accomplish their goal, I graduated, I don't need you anymore, right? Whereas a 65-year-old who's like, oh my gosh, I just need to get a little bit of strength back, a little bit of energy, they get some goals accomplished 6 months from now. They're like, I don't want to go back to who I was. I can't ever quit, right? Like they're stuck. So, which is a good thing, right? You want them to need you for the rest of their lives. So
yeah, I'm not even sure if it's that they can't quit, it's that they don't want to, right?
Right. The cost of quitting is greater, right? They're realizing this is the best thing I've ever done for myself at this age. I have to keep doing this. This is a huge investment in my, long-term health, right? Like they start to realize at 65 and a half, 6 months later, they're like, I'm going to be a better version of myself at 70 than I was at 60, because they're getting stronger and more fit and more balanced. And so then, the cost of the training becomes more in their mind an investment in their long-term health.
Yeah. And I think that I'm not sure what dissuades most coaches and trainers from working with this population. And obviously I want them to be better served. Right now it's fine. I mean, we're moving in that direction. More people are paying closer attention. But it seems like that this is going to shift quite a bit. I think a lot of trainers and coaches are taking themselves a little bit more seriously, to the point where they want to tackle these kinds of things. We want to, and then again, from an almost selfish, this isn't selfish perspective. I can't think of a more mutually beneficial relationship. If they are paying you, you're providing an actual service to where you are, enabling their life on a level that they hadn't been enabled before. Like I can't think of anything. And I hope that the trainers and coaches that are working with this population embrace that level of impact that they can have, for sure.
Yeah, I think they do. I think we see it almost immediately. I mean, people are like, oh my gosh, these are my favorite clients. I don't know why I missed this before, right? I mean, because now we're focused on helping people do life better, right? Feel better, move better, have a better quality of life. And when they start telling you things like, man, I did something with my grandkid I haven't been able to do in years. And I played wiffle ball in the backyard and actually, was able to do it. And, like I went on this trip and I wasn't tired. I didn't have to stay on the tour bus. And, you realize like, yeah, I'm really making a difference. I remember when my 72-year-old client came in and he's like, hey, Dan, check out my shoes. And I was like, this is the weirdest thing a 72-year-old client has ever said to me, right? What are you talking about? I look down, he's got brand new laced up tied shoes. Well, he came to me because he couldn't tie his own shoes, right? He'd had multiple knee replacements and no longer could tie his own shoes. So he always wore like old man Velcro shoes, right? And he was embarrassed by it, So by the time I look back up from his shoes, he's got like tears in his eyes. He's like, you've changed my life. He's like, and it really wasn't even so much about tying the shoes as it was like the look of it, made him like an old man. But really for him, it was, I can't get down to my shoes, which means I can't get down to tee up a golf ball. I can't get down to get a ball out of the hole. He's like, I make a birdie putt and I can't get the ball out of the hole. I feel like I'm an old man. So those kinds of things, it's like, that's 20 years ago. I've never forgotten it, and I never will, because it was so rewarding. And it was such a silly little thing, but to him it was gigantic, right? So way more meaningful than losing 15 pounds, like it changed his life. Those things are really cool. And I think trainers fall in love with those. And then they realize we can keep helping these clients. And many of these clients will be clients 3, 4, 5 years, right? You're going to have a long-term relationship with them and impact their lives for years.
Yeah. And working with this population, I mean, those crazy wins like that you remember 20 years, those can happen on a daily basis, because the benefits, again, as we close this out, the benefits of appropriately applied exercise, and just, I'm partial to resistance training specifically, but of course there are other avenues, can be so beneficial on a daily basis, that those kinds of lifelong changes, you have a decent client roster, you're going to be having those things on a weekly basis. And yep. I mean, as a trainer, we know that there's some grueling days, there's some long hours and stuff like that, and weird schedules, but like those things are kind of what for me kind of kept me going and everything like that. So Dr. Dan, it was awesome talking with you today. I'm sure you're a busy guy, so I'm going to let you go, but we appreciate everything that you're doing at the Functional Aging Institute. And I'm excited to see maybe a few decades down the road, we've kind of shifted the narrative for people of this population. So.
Yeah, thanks for having me.